most of the salespeople thought that the customer had the power. But when I explained to them their position and how someone walks into a showroom is in unusual territory, uncomfortable territory, it's clear just by describing that the salespeople have the power. They can guide them, they can move them through their process, which is a negotiation process. And so the customer doesn't have the power. Where I try and teach her, say, there's a process. There's the beginning of the negotiation where you start developing a relationship. You look at what you're negotiating for. You understand what the outcome you want is, and you start developing strategies and tactics to get to that outcome over a period of time. But at the end of the negotiation, you still have the relationship with that person. You can go back the next day and have the negotiation again with the same person, but with a better relationship.
Hello, and welcome to our channel, The S Factor. In today's episode of Global Achievers, we have Steve York joining us from Australia. He was part of 200 hostage negotiations, and today he's going to be teaching us on how to become a better negotiator. So stick around, we'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back. We have Steve joining us from Sydney, Australia, where it's the next day already. So he's joining us from the future. Steve, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks very much for having me.
All right, perfect. So we have a lot to unpack. Obviously, there are so many different things that I want to especially talk about today. But I guess we'll get started a little bit with your career in the police force.
Sure. I joined the police from university, actually. I was working at a finance company and doing economics part-time, and I found that the whole office thing was really boring. So one day I went out, decided to join the police, and I joined at 19 years old. Actually came out of the academy around my 19th birthday. And for the next 20 years, I spent in the New South Wales Police, and I was general duties. I was a detective for the majority of that time, for about 18 years. I worked in task forces, murder investigations, and about 10 years in, I was interested in negotiation, and applied for and got a role as a negotiator within the police. And I assisted with a couple of other police in developing and changing the policy for call-outs to high-risk policing incidents. And that was, instead of using force to resolve incidents, was using negotiation as the primary response. And I finished my career as the commander of the negotiators for New South Wales and leader of the negotiation team for the counter-terrorism response in Australia.
Excellent. And during that 20-year tenure, I recall that when we spoke last, you were part of about 200 negotiations, correct?
Yeah, I had over 200 negotiations as part of the team or as the commander.
The Inside Man is actually one of my favorite movies. And a lot of movies, TV shows that we watch, there is that element of, robbers going into a bank and then the negotiator arriving, all that. And we are so sort of conditioned by what we have watched on TV. So you have faced these situations hundreds of times in the real world. So I want to know, like, in terms of what we see on the movies and what actually happens in the real world, what would you say are some of these biggest misconceptions that we get by just watching TV shows or movies?
I don't know where you start really, because I think anybody whose profession is portrayed on the TV or movies
Mhm.
picks holes in it, like from the start to the end. I think the general thing is that the capability is both underestimated and overestimated. Either there's so much capability that you think, well, geez, I must be safe in the streets because there's all this police comes from everywhere and SWAT teams and all that sort of thing. But the reality is that it takes, 30 to 40 minutes in a city to get that capability in one place and on the road and to an event. And then it's not the capability anywhere near that you see on the television or movies. It's like a negotiator portrayed, as the focal point. Well, the primary negotiator is the focal point, but there's at least 3 other negotiators around the primary negotiator assisting, bringing information in, strategizing, and they work within another team structure which, has got a governance process, and there's very little room for negotiation other than, come out and everything will be safe. So I think those are the things that really strike me. I think there was a movie called The Negotiator where, he did everything by himself. That just ain't true.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. Now, sort of, once you were done and you left the force, you started your own company. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I was fortunate in that when I decided that I was getting paid exactly the same as a person who was my rank, which was inspector, who was sitting, at the beachside suburb near Byron Bay in Australia, who went for a swim in the morning and had lunch at home in the midday, and then went for a surf in the afternoon. And I was getting called out 3 or 4 times a week, usually after midnight, and then working 8 hours the following day. I was getting paid exactly the same, even though I had a master's degree and other education and a lot of experience. And that's just the way the police operates. So I made the move to leave the police. And as I said, I was lucky. I was working in risk management as part of the police, and I'd contributed to the Australian standard in risk management. And so I took the idea that risk management was going to be a thing of the future. This was 1996. So I designed a consulting company around that. And I ended up having 15 consultants and offices in 3 capital cities, and reasonably successful. But I was working basically 23 hours a day again, which I think happens to all small business people. You get sucked into the business rather than working on it. And that's what happened to me. And my wife convinced me to sell my share in the business and to go into the corporate sector, which I did.
Okay. So you sold the business and you moved into the corporate sector. What are some of the roles that you've held?
Yes, so I went into the Commonwealth Bank as executive manager for operational risk. Then I went to Marsh McLellan as general manager for risk management for Southeast Asia. And then I went to Deloitte as a partner for Central Europe in investigations and disputes. Came back to Australia to a general manager for the Bank of Queensland in financial crime and operational risk. and to where I am today as the executive manager for financial crime for the globe in institutional banking and markets at the CBA.
Okay. And at each of these companies, how many people on an average would be on your team?
Around about, I suppose, I'd have around about 5 or 6 direct reports and over 100 people.
Okay. All right. So I think one of the most interesting parts of today's episode, and I think a lot of people would be waiting for this, is to learn from you, from all the years of experience, on how to become a more effective negotiator. I think even myself, I was telling my wife earlier today that, you know what, this is an episode you would want to watch as well. So she's also waiting for this one, and as am I, because as you said one time to me, was that you can learn it. This is not a skill that you are either born with or you're not, right? You can learn this skill. So could you tell us like a step-by-step system on how someone can actually become a better negotiator?
Yeah, look, I wish I had that magic wand because I'd like to be able to sell it, over and over. But it is true. I've said this many times. I've taken police from being just a regular cop with some special personal skills, like the ability to develop rapport very quickly, to have lots of relationships, working relationships that they operate in a day-to-day basis. But I can take them from that to being able to talk someone down from a cliff, or to be able to talk with a irrational person who's taken a hostage or barricaded themselves in a place and threatening suicide, and to be able to successfully negotiate the event quietly, carefully, professionally. How do you do it? Well, there is a process. There are micro skills. There are things you do at the beginning of the negotiation and things you do towards the end of the negotiation. So there's a structure. And those micro skills you can practice every single day with everyone you meet.
Okay. All right. Are there any particular steps in a negotiation process that one can follow?
Well, the first thing is understanding that negotiation, at least and let's differentiate between bargaining, which is someone saying this is worth $10 and you say, no, it's only worth $5, I'm going to pay $5. That's the bargaining or single cycle negotiation, to that style of negotiation to a long cycle negotiation, which is going to go over a longer period, but more than likely you're going to come across the same person again in business or, down the street or wherever. So my daughter is very good at bargaining, at street stores and all those sorts of things. But the big thing about it, she doesn't want a relationship with that person ever again. And so that frees her up to do all sorts of things like walk away, say she hasn't got enough money, all those little tricks that you can use in bargaining. Where I try and teach her, say, there's a process. There's a beginning of the negotiation where you start developing a relationship. You look at what you're negotiating for. You understand what the outcome you want is, and you start developing strategies and tactics to get to that outcome over a period of time. But at the end of the negotiation, you still have the relationship with that person. You can go back the next day and have the negotiation again with the same person, but with a better relationship. The first one, preparation, which is, just everything you do to prepare yourself, your skills in negotiation. But it's also research, and it's understanding the background, understanding what the elements are at play in the negotiation. So if you're going to go and buy a car, you wouldn't go and just ask the person how much is the car without looking at all your options of other cars. And so you develop what I call a plan B. So if the negotiation plan A doesn't work, you know what your plan B is. So it makes you far more powerful, and that comes into understanding where the power is. I lectured to a car dealership, and most of the salespeople thought that the customer had the power. But when I explained to them their position and how someone walks into a showroom is in unusual territory, uncomfortable territory, it's clear just by describing that the salespeople have the power. They can guide them, they can move them through their process, which is a negotiation process. And so the customer doesn't have the power. They have the power of saying no, or the power of having money in their back pocket, and hopefully they've got a plan B. But in that situation, the salesperson may have the power because they'll know the variance of the cars. They'll know what the margins are in every single variant of that particular car. They know how much they can reduce, to still make their margin and still go within their sales targets. So there's a lot happening around power. So the perception of that power becomes really important, because if you perceive yourself to be powerful, often you are, because you act differently, you talk differently, your body language is different, and that is picked up by the other party, and they'll respond to that confidence, they'll respond to that personal power. But there's a whole lot of interaction between personal power and positional power. And, ultimately, the seller has the power of saying yes or no to a deal. And, of course, the buyer has the power of saying yes or no to the deal as well. But it's around, why are they in the one place at the one time? Well, they've got common ground. One wants to buy a car, one wants to sell a car. Tremendous common ground. So that's one of the things you can work on, is that common ground. And then it's about time. How much time have you got to be able to go through the negotiation? Now, there's no way I'd buy a car under a year of research. No way. When I talk to my friends, they go, well, that's silly, because it's just a car and, you drive it for 5 years and you throw it away. But to me, it's not. To me, it's still something special. I enjoy cars, and it's an important negotiation. So I do my research, and I've got all the time in the world. When you look at the salesperson, what's their time? Often they've got to make budget by the end of the month. So they've got to make this sale. So their time is restricted. And of course, my time is unlimited. So I can use that power differential in time to my advantage. In fact, often I wait till the end of the financial year before I go and start negotiating a car, because I know it's not only the end of the month, but it's at the end of the financial year, and those targets have got to be met by the salespeople. So my power is far greater than it would be at the beginning of the month or the middle of the month.
Wow, that's very fascinating. So what I picked up from that was that from every stage, the power dynamics can shift, whether you are the consumer or you are the seller. And the thing is that understanding exactly where your position is how you can leverage that and sort of, bring out the outcome that you're looking for. Because as you said, that both parties have a common ground, and that's the reason why they're there. So the thing is that ultimately people want to complete the transaction, let's say. Okay.
That's right. That's right. And when I did a straw poll of the car salespeople, some of the older people there, a couple of guys in particular, have had the same clients for 30 years. Even though they've moved from maker to different car places, the clients have followed them. Why have they followed them? And it's about trust. Because as you go through a negotiation, you've got to build trust. It's not trust that I'll give my wallet to you and you'll return it with all the money in it, but it's trust that you'll do no harm to the other party. And this is a very important aspect in negotiation.
Got it. Perfect. So for anyone who's looking to sharpen their skills, what are some of the avenues that you recommend them to seek out?
Well, I think the first thing is, grab books and look for active listening skills and some of the tips and tricks in those books. And of course, Roger Fisher, Getting to Yes, written some 30 years ago, and I was lucky enough to have him in my course at Harvard as my professor. Fantastic mind, just lateral thinking. And I learnt a lot of the tips and tricks about negotiating cars from him because of some of the things he did, to keep his skills alive. I think you can practice building working relationships with people, including, the person that pours your coffee to the person that washes your car. And you find that you may not get the service cheaper, but what I find is you get better service all the time. If you remember the people's names, you might remember something about them, something they've done, where they've come from, and you build that relationship over days, months, years. I can guarantee you that you'll get the best service all the time, and you'll be recognised and you'll be treated very well. And that's an outcome of being a good negotiator. And, you may get the odd free coffee, but that's not what you're there for. It's about sharpening those skills to ask the right questions, to build that relationship bit by bit.
Excellent. This was a very fascinating episode, very interesting episode as well, especially for me. I know you have given a lot of value to our audience as well. Now, Steve, if people wanted to find you, where would they look?
Steve York at steveyork.com.au. So it's an Australian website, Steve York at steveyork.com.au.
Awesome.
And drop me a note, and I'm sure that I'll be able to respond.
Okay, excellent. And that, along with other information, will be in the description box below. So if anyone wants to sort of delve more into the mind of Steve, to learn a little more from him about negotiating and about all his experiences, please feel free to do so. Steve, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure our audience does too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jarek. I really appreciated you chatting with me today. It was great.
Thanks for watching. We really appreciate that. If you like what you saw, then give us a like. It really helps with YouTube's algorithm. If you want to see similar kind of videos, then subscribe to the channel. And finally, if there's a type of professional you want featured on a future episode, then let us know in the comment box below. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.